Hey guys, welcome back to Trekyards. I'm Captain Foley.
I'm Connor Cookings, and
I am the anti-Trekker, Michael J. Crawford.
Yes, we have a celebrity guest with us today, if you will. He's another YouTube channel. He's good friends with Lore Reloaded, who we've had on the show before, and recently started watching Anti-Trekker. Some great content, so I suggest you guys go check it out. But we thought we would have him here today to have a little debate. And today we're going to be specifically talking about the Borg, and how good a villain have they actually been in the Star Trek universe?
that's a big question, Stuart.
It is a big question. I think we should just jump off and start talking about it because I don't have anything specific.
Well, okay, then I guess the summaries to start off to see if where we stand. I think the Borg are a good threat, but they change as the plot demands with some really interesting, unique pieces that elevate them and yet create more questions. But I think for the most part, those things can be cleverly rewoven in and still work. And there's interesting evolution points that you can point to, which are quite fascinating. Stuart, what do you think?
I think the Borg started out being terrifying. Literally like the, zombies, unstoppable, just scary, faceless, entities. And eventually they became humanized, they became watered down, they became diluted. When we got to Voyager, they were just like an alien of the week, like you could deal with them like the Klingons. You could beam over and just hang out with them on their ship. And, they lost the terrifying, aspect, which they kind of lost in TNG. But then when First Contact hit, they kind of went back to being scary again for the movie a little bit. And then lost it again. They've been all over the place as far as I'm concerned.
And then for the catalyst of the conversation, go.
I'll say this. I agree with bits of what both of you said. I do think that
that's exciting.
So they started out as the best single villain I've ever seen in Trek in Q Who. Unfortunately, that was the only time I found them truly frightening was in Q Who. They immediately went downhill. Now, don't get me wrong, they were still great in Best of Both Worlds, but they had gone downhill from Q Who. They were horrifically bad in subsequent episodes of TNG. I disagree with Captain Foley as far as their scariness in First Contact, and I'm sure we'll get into this because the whole zombie thing, that is the worst thing about what they changed about. Again, I'm sure we'll get into that. Voyager, here's the thing about Voyager is that in Scorpion, the first time we got the Borg proper in Scorpion, because we had that weird one where Chakotay met some deborged Borg, but Scorpion was really our first introduction
the
of the Borg.
10 Borg cubes in one scene episode.
Yes. That was awesome. That looked like a return to form for me. However, everything subsequent to that was, if you've seen my avatar, that's my description. So I don't know. Yeah, I know that Captain Foley knows what I'm talking about.
That would be shit.
Oh, yeah.
That would be shit. A pile of shit.
With sunglasses? Or just big eyes?
Just
with the
regular
glasses he's got, yeah, and he's got his little beard on his little.
Yes. So yes, the post Scorpion Borg were horrible, and just that's being very generous.
So basically, they had 2 blips of good, and the rest of it was subpar at best.
I would say, 2 blips of great. I would say 2 blips of good. Everything else crap. And so the great was Q Who and Scorpion. Mm-hmm. The good was Best of Both Worlds and Enterprise Regeneration. Okay. Everything else was crap.
Okay, like threshold crap or just normal crap? Because that's important. That's important.
No, you're that's a very fair. Okay, so we distinguish between great and good. So now let's talk about crap and threshold. So I would say that the Borg hitting the threshold point would be the Borg in Endgame and Unimatrix 01.
Not Data Law or the one, whatever that was.
No, the Descent
Renegade
was,
Data.
Yeah, the Descent was crap. I wouldn't go threshold.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh yeah, no. Just compared to like Endgame, it's like
Yeah, Endgame was horrifically bad.
I like Endgame a lot.
Do you really?
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna have some fighting to do there.
There we go. Future episodes.
I'll be the fight music. Dun, 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 dun,
You'll have to keep doing that for a long time, Stuart. 'Cause I have a lot of points in the game. So Stuart, your reaction to that then, Stuart? basically dismantled you and said, no, bad, good.
I'm used to him disagreeing with me at every chance he gets. But I kind of see his point. I do like Endgame, but yeah, for me, the Borg they got too humanized. They got too normalized for me. I wish they would have kept them a little more mysterious, because that's why in Q-Who they're so terrifying, because they're just an unstoppable force. And I do think that for First Contact, they ramped up the scariness factor. If you compare those Borg to like the ones we see in TNG, they look
the look
for a movie audience.
I'll give you that the look of the Borg had improved as far as the individual drones. However, the ultimate humanization of the Borg was the introduction of the Queen. And that is even though I hated Descent, and I think that Descent was absolute crap. I did a review on Descent recently on my channel, and I was not very kind. But the introduction of the Borg Queen is the single worst thing they ever did with the Borg. They did it in First Contact. They skipped it in Scorpion, which was when I was like a return to form. But then they brought it back for future renditions of the Borg in Voyager. And the Borg Queen absolutely ruins the entire concept, because it takes it away from a faceless, unstoppable force and makes it a witch with zombies.
Yes. But I want to delve back then on my reaction to the crap until the two bits there are good. The promise and the good and the bad about the Borg, though, the first appearance is great because it is the simplest thing. It's like the Predator movie. It's as simple as it gets. There's no fluff. It's just what it is. But if that's the concept that you love the most, there's nowhere to go from there. It's a race that makes you them, that you can't beat.
But you're wrong.
There's nothing else to go. If you have them back again, they have to be again. A ship appears, tries to assimilate you. You can't have dialogue, you can't have action, you either stop them or don't. You either get assimilated or don't. They either take you or don't. They either kill you or don't. There's nothing else that the Borg, as the original threat, can do, because they're a one-dimensional thing. They're as much as fungus is to, or wet rot. It just consumes. That is it. There is nothing else. It's just cancer. The cancer has no personality. Obviously, then they had to evolve it. The Borg in TNG were interesting because they kept diverting from the base concept. They showed us Hugh and Cyborg and Renegade Borg, which don't
Side boob. What? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
They don't represent the Borg. They're just Borg people now free. That's very different. Now, when the Queen obviously comes in, that changes the nature of it to make it a functioning story plot, a functioning thing to progress with, because now you evolve it into. Yes, it's strange. There's a person on top, and that's a whole debate after we address the first thing I said as well. But it's interesting as a concept. I do think people misrepresent the Queen as a concept, and I think I talked to Laurie about this as well. Because you can look at it one of two or three ways, but in my head I look at it a certain way, and it makes at least enough sense to function. But you said no, that's not why they're. They could do more being a one-tone villain. What more could they do from a single appearance if they just did that again?
First of all, I want anybody who happens to be a subscriber to my channel to mark this moment in history, because I am about to correct Trekyards on a factual mistake. So I am so excited about this. This is just like this is the high point of my YouTube career.
You do realize that Samuel has the ability to edit this out, right? So
Yeah.
even if you do prove us wrong,
I was wrong. Sorry, Samuel. I got that wrong.
Nowhere. And will you find, and you can rewatch it, because I have watched every single Borg episode up to Scorpion in the last couple of months for a series I've been doing on my channel. Nowhere in Q-Who will you find any indication whatsoever that the Borg have any intention of assimilating anybody. There is no assimilation factor in Borg. The Borg are a specific race. And in fact, the first time assimilation is brought up is in Best of Both Worlds. And this is one of the problems with the retconning of the Borg that goes on over and over and over. That was a unique situation. They even address that in Best of Both Worlds Part 1, where they say, wait a minute, they're not interested in people. They're only interested in our technology. Picard says their priorities have changed. They bring Picard over, and guess what? The Borg tell him the explanation and say, we wish to improve ourselves, and so we're going to assimilate. We're going to add you to your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own. That is, according to if forgetting about everything that came after that, based on what we saw in chronological order, humanity was going to be the first species ever assimilated. And this was the Borg changing their modus operandi because they found that assimilating humans into their collective could improve their collective. And so that, unfortunately, they retcon that in First Contact, where they basically say that they have assimilated thousands of species.
See, the problem is you've said that, but obviously you can either look at it as production order or canon order. It's like saying the Reliance called the Avenger class because it was in a magazine first, but then they say it afterwards. I mean, you can say that, but that's not the Borg in Regeneration assimilate. I know the First Contact Borg, but there's a sense of, they talk about assimilating millions of cultures for thousands of years. I mean, they say that later on. So yes, you can say at the time of that one episode, but they actively chose to not take that direction. They evolved the concept out of the one-dimensional concept, which probably was a dead end. So you're going against canon to argue that they're better if they're only.
I'd say that the original writing of the Borg was far superior to what we got, and that's my biggest.
But that's
problem.
Less menacing though, because they didn't. They would just shoot you. They would just assimilate. They would just take information out, because you don't need to assimilate the ship. You just need to take the data off the ship, like they did. You just take the data. You destroy the ship and boom, you're done. I mean, they become a much more uninteresting race if they're not assimilating people, if they're not bringing them in. Then it becomes this big plague. It's just a one.
And I would be okay with that. As far as that concept and best of both worlds, the idea that the Borg are like, hey, we can actually improve ourselves by bringing other species in, I'm good with that. What I didn't like, and don't get me wrong, I get it's canon, I'm not going to argue that it's not, but I didn't like when they established in First Contact and reinforced in Voyager that the Borg have been assimilating races forever and ever and ever. I think the idea that the Borg suddenly met a race that they thought, we get some of that, we can improve. And that becomes their new motive. That becomes the whole reason they would send a cube halfway across the galaxy to, because right now, how does it make any logical sense that the Borg twice now would send a cube all the way across the galaxy to assimilate a relatively unremarkable planet? Because the Federation, while they were lucky and beat the Borg a couple of times, there's nothing about their tech or anything like that that you don't see in the Delta Quadrant. And so,
and just remember that's not even the biggest plot hole. Why don't they just use the transwarp conduit to get there in 5 seconds?
Right. Well, yeah. Apparently, there's.
I mean, it takes a few seconds.
Yeah, that's a problem with, especially when you solve, like you were saying earlier, canon versus the release order of the show. In Scorpion, the whole point of the Janeway compromise that the Borg were willing to make was that it was going to take a long time for the cube to get Voyager across Borg space, and so they would have to. The Borg wanted the technology right away, and Janeway negotiated and said no. However, they could have just gone straight to a transwarp conduit, dropped them off literally at Earth's doorstep, and said, "Okay, give us the tech."
But to be fair, they also weren't traveling at transwarp at all, which would have been 10 times faster. But I'm assuming there wasn't a conduit nearby, because there's only like 7 in the entire universe.
There's only 7 hubs, but there are transwarp conduits. It's just like hyperspace from Star Wars. There are transwarp.
But there aren't conduits that get you to the Alpha Quadrant. They'd have to still do manually traversing faster than normal. So you might as well go to a hub to make it instant. It'll still take decades, theoretically.
I don't know. Well, we know that Voyager runs into a hub. 3 years later or 4 years later.
It's true. Mm-hmm.
And so given
that,
and we know that Voyager was not going at warp 9 the whole time because they decided to stop and explore every stupid phenomenon they ran into. So, and that's just the on-screen stuff that we saw. Who knows how many times they just decided to take a couple weeks vacation. So we can assume that a Borg towing Voyager, or of course another thing we saw in Endgame, bring Voyager onto the ship, because we know that a sphere can do that, so certainly a cube could do that. So bring Voyager into the cube, and then at maximum Borg speed, go to the hub, and then get to Earth. At most, it would take months. At most. I would dare say that they could probably do it in days. And then that could have gotten Voyager to the Alpha Quadrant and would have changed the series, of course. But I think that
although we know the Borg don't like speed, that's their entire resume. We'll take our time.
Except for, of course, when they want to attack Earth for some reason.
Yeah.
You know, that doesn't make any sense. Now, but here's my thing about the original Borg.
Yeah.
And I don't see, and I know because we think of the Borg as they're a humanoid species that are interconnected via technology and to create a hive mind. That's not how I see the Borg at all in Q Who. And what I think the
I'm
original
rewatching now, by the way, just for.
Huh?
I'm watching that right now on the other monitor, just for good research here.
Oh, Q Who?
Yeah.
Very cool. I think of the Borg in Q Who as being from the same place and the same basic function as the creatures from Operation Annihilate. They are a natural collective. They are, in fact, one being. There is only one Borg. It's an incredibly huge organism. Or at the very least, you could say there are multiple collectives, but each collective is made up of thousands of cells, each cell being a humanoid in appearance. However, they then started using technology to enhance that ability. I think that would make that's an interesting it's something totally alien, totally different than anything we've ever seen before.
Can I throw in an interesting side note there? Because we do see they grow and born Borg. That's the only time that appears in the episode.
I was gonna mention that the maturation chambers. A lot of people have raised problems with that, but I think Anti-Trekker is right in that regard, that they never really were assimilating other races before. That's how they actually propagated their species, by using the maturation chambers.
Because I'm watching the episode and everyone is a relatively same height, white face, male and female. There's both genders, but it's very ambiguous.
Right.
So
and Q even straight up says not a he, not a she.
Yeah.
It's
But so obviously this is not a natural. They didn't build this cube.
No,
naturally.
the cube itself is not naturally, but the cube to them would be the equivalent of, in our modern society, a car.
Well, no, think of it this way. Think of it more as, if you can grow drones, each of which are not important, have their individuality, but each one is needed to function in the ship, and the more you have, the more you can processing power. Then they're just growing clones to be processors on their ships, to allow them, whoever was the originators that put these ships together. Like, they're not growing a person is not necessary. You grow a clone.
Right.
It's not a person, and they're all very similar, and they're all the same species. That's why I was looking through if they have species. So it is just a species that is building processors. They just happen to be people processors of their race.
And that's what made me think of the Operation Annihilate species, because those were just single brain cells that were interconnected into a larger whole. Mm-hmm. And we just didn't get a feeling of intelligence from that species, but I think that was more limitation of the 60s as opposed to anything else. Change the frequency because the Borg shields are so specific that they have to readapt. That makes a certain logical sense. So then when they come up with the idea of putting a chip in that changes the frequency every time you fire, means the Borg cannot adapt.
See you then, guys.
However,